The morning of our 41st wedding anniversary, I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing my coffee mug, when I heard my son's voice through the screen door. He was on the back porch, and he didn't know I was awake yet. "She doesn't suspect anything," he said. "Just make sure you're ready when I give you the signal. Once he signs, we move the same day. Don't wait." I stood perfectly still. The water was still running. I turned it off slowly so the pipes wouldn't knock. "Trust me, she'll keep him busy. You know how Dad gets one glass of wine and he's talking about the old days for 2 hours." He laughed. It was a laugh I recognized. It was the laugh he used when he thought something was clever. By the time he figures it out, it'll already be done. I set the mug down on the counter without making a sound. Then I walked back to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the framed photo of my wife on the nightstand. She'd been gone for 3 years. I thought about what she would have said if she'd heard what I just heard. I already knew. She would have said, "Walter, don't get angry. Get ready. My name is Walter Breck. I'm 68 years old. I spent 32 years as a structural engineer, mostly bridges and overpasses. I retired at 63 with a pension, a paid-off house in Raleigh, and a modest portfolio that my wife and I had built together over 4 decades of careful living. We didn't take fancy vacations. We drove our cars until the wheels practically fell off. We saved because we knew that someday the saving would matter. We never imagined it would matter like this. My son's name is Derek. He's 41. After college, he bounced between jobs for a while. Sales, real estate, a brief and disastrous attempt at running a food truck before landing at a mid-sized investment firm in Charlotte, where he worked as a junior broker. He was always the kind of man who was very good at sounding like he knew what he was talking about. His wife, my daughter-in-law, was the same way. Always the first to offer to help clean up after dinner, and always somehow never quite there when the actual cleaning happened. For the first 2 years after my wife passed, they were attentive. Derek called every Sunday. He and his wife drove up for holidays. They invited me to Charlotte for weekends. I was grateful. Grief does something strange to a person. It makes you reach toward warmth wherever you can find it. Even if some part of you, some deep and quiet part, notices things that don't quite add up. It started small. Derek mentioned, casually, that he'd been looking at some investment opportunities. "Infrastructure funds," he said. "Low risk, strong returns." He'd been doing research. He thought I might be interested. I listened. I didn't commit to anything. Then he brought it up again, and again, each time with a little more detail, a little more urgency. "I'm not in any rush," I told him. "Dad," he said, and there was something in his voice, not quite irritation, but something close to it. "This isn't the kind of thing you want to wait on." I didn't sign anything. I smiled, changed the subject, and later that night, I sat in my study and thought about the fact that my son had never once, in his entire adult life, given me a financial tip that worked out. But I told myself I was being uncharitable. He was my son. He loved me. People make mistakes, and then they grow up. I'd made my own mistakes at his age. So when he suggested we celebrate my anniversary, the anniversary of my marriage to his mother, with a family dinner at the house, I said yes. When he said his wife would cook, I said wonderful. When he mentioned that his business partner, a man named Trent, might stop by to drop off some paperwork, I said, "Of course. No problem. Bring him along." And when my old friend Raymond called me 2 days before the dinner, I answered on the second ring. Raymond and I had been friends since we were 26 years old. We'd been in each other's weddings. He'd held my hand at my wife's funeral. He was also a retired attorney who had spent the better part of his career handling estate law in Wake County. I didn't call him because I was suspicious. I called him because I'd promised my wife, years ago, that I would talk to Raymond before I ever signed anything financial. She'd made me promise that specifically. She didn't trust anyone near our money without Raymond looking at it first. I told him what Derek had been saying. The investment fund. The business partner named Trent, who was going to stop by with paperwork. Raymond was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Walter, I want you to do something for me." I told him anything. "Don't sign a single thing this weekend," he said, "and call me the moment you know what the paperwork is." After I heard Derek on the back porch that morning, I sat in the bedroom for 40 minutes. I didn't panic. Panic had never been useful to me, and I was too old to start finding it useful now. I went through what I knew. My son was planning something for today. There was someone else involved, Trent. Almost certainly. My daughter-in-law was going to keep me occupied. And whatever they were doing, they wanted it done before I had a chance to understand what I'd agreed to. I picked up my phone and I called Raymond. I told him what I'd heard, word for word. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "I'll be there by noon." I told him the dinner wasn't until 6. He said he'd be there by noon anyway. Raymond arrived at 11:45. I let him in through the side door and made coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table while the house was still empty. I told him everything, not just what I'd heard that morning, but all of it. The months of suggestions, the urgency, the fund that was almost full, the way Derek's voice had changed slightly when I didn't immediately agree. Raymond took notes on a legal pad. He asked me twice whether I had ever given Derek any form of financial power of attorney. I said no. He asked if Derek had access to any of my accounts. I said no. He asked if Derek had ever asked to see my portfolio documents or my will. I said he'd asked once, about 18 months ago, and I'd told him those things were handled. Raymond put his pen down and looked at me over his reading glasses. "Here's what I think is happening," he said. "Based on what you're describing, I think your son has found a way to present you with documents that look like an investment agreement but function as something broader. If Trent is a licensed broker or financial advisor, they can construct paperwork that shifts authority over your accounts in ways that aren't obvious to someone who isn't reading carefully. Once you sign, they move the money into a vehicle they control, and by the time you realize what happened, it's been restructured enough that tracing it is slow and expensive." I sat with that for a moment. "My own son," I said. Raymond didn't say anything. He just looked at me steadily, the way he'd been looking at me for over 40 years, which was the look that meant, "I know, and I'm sorry, but we have to deal with what's in front of us." We made a plan. Raymond would stay in my back study. The door would be mostly closed. He would have his phone out, and he would be available the moment I needed him. I would go through the dinner normally. I would be warm. I would be relaxed. I would not let Derek or his wife see anything on my face that suggested I knew something was wrong. And when Trent arrived with the paperwork, I would take it. I would look at it, and I would excuse myself to use the bathroom and hand it directly to Raymond. We shook hands. Then Raymond went to set up in the study, and I went to take a shower and get dressed, because it was my anniversary and I intended to look presentable. They arrived at 4 o'clock. Derek was carrying 2 bags of groceries. His wife had flowers, white lilies, my wife's favorite, which I had mentioned once at a holiday dinner 3 years ago, and the fact that she had remembered either meant she was thoughtful or she had written it down somewhere as useful information. I wasn't sure which anymore. "Dad," Derek said, hugging me. "Happy anniversary." I hugged him back. He was my son. Whatever was happening, he was still my son. And I held on to that. "Thank you for doing this," I said. His wife kissed me on the cheek and went straight to the kitchen. She was confident in spaces she'd only visited a few times, which was something I noticed and stored away. Derek set the groceries down and started asking about the backyard, whether I'd had the fence repaired, whether the garden was coming in the way I'd wanted. Normal things. Easy things. He was good at easy things. I gave him a tour of the backyard. We talked about the summer. He asked about my neighbor Ted, who had recovered from a hip replacement. And I told him Ted was walking 2 miles a day now and driving his wife crazy. We both laughed. It was comfortable. It felt almost exactly like being his father. Around 5:30, a car pulled up in front of the house. "Oh," Derek said, as if he'd just remembered. "That's Trent. I hope you don't mind, he had something to drop off for me, and it was on his way." He won't stay long. Not at all, I said. Invite him in. Trent was younger than I expected. Mid-30s. Blue blazer. The kind of handshake that is designed to feel reassuring. He came in with a leather portfolio under his arm and complimented the house twice in the first 30 seconds. Mr. Breck, he said, Derek has told me so much about you. 32 years in civil engineering, that's remarkable. The Pemberton overpass on I-85. That was yours, wasn't it? It was. I was briefly surprised he knew that. Then I realized that knowing a specific detail about the person you're trying to persuade is exactly the kind of thing someone prepares in advance. It was, I said, long time ago. Well, sir, it's an honor. He sat down at the living room table when Derek gestured for him to. His wife called from the kitchen that dinner would be ready in about 45 minutes. Everything was moving on a schedule that had been set before I woke up that morning. Trent opened the portfolio and began explaining. An infrastructure investment trust, he said. Private placement. Strong quarterly returns. Limited entry points because of the structure of the fund. He used a great many words that sounded technical and were technically accurate, but that, assembled together, described something that would require very careful reading to understand fully. He slid a document across the table. Nothing to worry about, Derek said, from the armchair across from me. Casual. Arms crossed. Watching. Trent just needs a signature on the initial agreement, so he can hold the position. You can review the full prospectus afterward. There it was. Sign first. Review later. I picked up the document. I looked at it. I turned the first page, then the second. On the third page, there was a clause written in the kind of language that is technically a sentence, but practically a maze. It authorized a designated financial representative, whose name was filled in as Derek Allen Breck, to act on my behalf in all matters related to the management and liquidation of listed accounts. Listed accounts. With account numbers I recognized. I set the document down on the table and looked at Trent. Would you mind if I just stepped away for a moment? I said. My back's been bothering me. I need to take my evening medication. Of course, Trent said. Derek said nothing. His wife called from the kitchen to ask if anyone wanted wine. I picked up the document and carried it with me down the hall. Raymond read it in 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock above his desk. He didn't need longer than that. He put it down and circled 3 sections with a red pen and wrote 4 words at the top of the first page. This is financial fraud. Then he handed me his own document. He'd prepared it that afternoon, anticipating something along these lines. It was a formal notice that I was retaining independent legal counsel and that any agreement purporting to transfer financial authority without independent review would be considered invalid and contested. He'd also prepared a second document, a statement I could have notarized the following morning, revoking any financial instruments in my name that I had not personally authorized with counsel present. Go back out there, he said quietly. Tell them you'd like to have your personal attorney review it before you sign. Watch their faces. I straightened my back. I thought about the Pemberton overpass, which had stood for 23 years through 3 hurricanes and a flood, because I had checked every calculation twice and refused to let anyone rush the inspection. I walked back down the hall. Sorry about that, I said. I sat down. I put Trent's document on the table between us, and I folded my hands on top of it. I've been going over this and I'd like my attorney to take a look before I sign anything. He's available Monday. Can we set something up for early next week? The room changed. It didn't change loudly. There was no outburst. But something shifted in the air, the way it shifts right before weather moves in. Derek uncrossed his arms. Trent's smile held, but his eyes moved to Derek. His wife went quiet in the kitchen. Dad, Derek said, there's really no need for that. This is standard. Trent does this every day. I'm sure he does, I said. I'd still like Raymond to look at it. He's been my attorney for 15 years. I think he'd be disappointed if I signed something significant without running it by him. It's not significant, Derek said. It's just a placeholder. Then Raymond will read it quickly, and we can all move forward on Monday. I looked at him steadily. Derek's jaw tightened. His wife appeared in the doorway of the kitchen holding a dish towel. Trent closed his portfolio and looked at the table. "There's no urgency," Derek said, but his voice had gone flat. "Good," I said. "Then Monday works perfectly." Trent left 20 minutes later. He shook my hand on the way out, but the handshake was different, quicker, lighter. Already retreating, Derek walked him to his car, and they stood in the driveway for a few minutes, talking in low voices while I waited inside. Dinner was quiet. His wife had made baked chicken and roasted vegetables. It was good food. We ate it in a kind of careful politeness, the conversation skimming the surface of everything: Ted's hip, the summer weather, a movie Derek had seen recently. No one mentioned the document. No one mentioned Trent. After dinner, Derek helped clear the plates, which was unusual. His wife went to the kitchen and ran the water loud enough that I couldn't hear what she was doing. Derek sat down across from me with the kind of expression a person wears when they've decided to try a different approach. "Dad," he said, "I want to be honest with you." I said, "I think that would be a good idea." He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at the table. "We've been in a hard spot financially. Me and her. The last 2 years it's been a lot. The market was rough. Some things I invested in didn't work out the way I planned. We've been trying to dig out." I said nothing. I let him talk. "I thought if I could get access to a portion of your portfolio, just temporarily, I could turn it around. I was going to pay it back. That was always the plan. I know how it looks. I know what you must be thinking." He exhaled. "I didn't think it through. I was desperate and I didn't think it through." "Derek," I said, "look at me." He looked up. "What was in that document wasn't temporary access to a portion of my portfolio," I said. "It was full financial authority over every account I have. Your name, your authority, no restrictions, no timeline." He opened his mouth. "Don't," I said. Not angry, just firm. I read it. My attorney read it. "Don't tell me it wasn't what it was." He closed his mouth. His wife had stopped running the water in the kitchen. I sat with him for a long moment. He was my son. He had his mother's eyes. I had driven him to his first day of school and taught him to ride a bike in this very driveway. And I remembered the way he'd looked over his shoulder when he realized I'd let go. "I love you," I said. "But what you tried to do today is not something I can pretend didn't happen." He nodded slowly. His eyes were wet. "You're going to have to figure out your financial situation," I said. "And you're going to have to figure it out honestly. I can't help you with money right now, not because I don't love you, but because I don't trust what you would do with it. That's going to take time to rebuild. If you want to rebuild it, then that is something I am willing to work toward. But it starts with honesty." Tonight was not honest. Derek nodded again. He didn't speak. I don't think he trusted himself to. They left just after 9. His wife hugged me at the door and said she was sorry, which was the most genuine thing she had said all evening. Derek hugged me too, longer than usual, and I let him, because he was still my boy and I was still his father, and those things don't dissolve even when everything else gets complicated. Raymond came out of the study when their car was gone. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot that was still warm and leaned against the counter. "How are you doing?" he said. "I don't know yet," I said. "Ask me in a week." He nodded. He knew better than to push. The following Monday, Raymond filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina Secretary of State's office regarding Trent's conduct. Trent, it turned out, was not a licensed broker in North Carolina. His license had lapsed 8 months earlier. The investment fund he had described did not exist in the form he had presented it. 3 other people had signed versions of the same document in the previous 4 months. None of them were as stubborn as I was about reading things carefully. Raymond walked me through the process of reviewing all of my accounts, updating my beneficiary designations, and establishing a revocable trust that made it significantly more difficult for anyone to claim authority over my assets without a multi-step legal process. We also updated my will. I did not remove Derek from it, he was still my son, but I added conditions, and I added Raymond as the trustee of record. Trent was referred to the state attorney general's office. I don't know exactly what happened after that. I know that 3 months later, Raymond told me that Trent had surrendered what remained of his financial credentials, and that there was an ongoing civil proceeding involving the other families he had approached. As for Derek, he called me on a Sunday, about 6 weeks after the dinner. He didn't ask for anything. He told me he and his wife had started seeing a financial counselor, that they were going to sell their second car, that he had taken on extra hours at work, that he was sorry, and he knew sorry wasn't enough, but he wanted to say it again anyway. I told him I heard him. We didn't fix everything in one phone call. 41 years of marriage had taught me that very few things worth fixing get fixed in a single conversation. You do the work in small increments over long stretches of time, and you keep showing up. And eventually, you look back and realize that something that was broken has quietly, incrementally, become whole again. I don't know yet if that will happen with my son. I hope it will. I intend to give it the chance. What I do know is this. The evening before the dinner, I had sat in the study looking at the photograph of my wife and asked her, quietly, what I was supposed to do. I do that. Sometimes. Still, it feels less strange than it used to. And what I felt, sitting there not heard, exactly, but felt, was this. That she had spent 41 years building something real with me. And that what we built was worth protecting, and that protecting it was not a betrayal of love. It was an expression of it. The Pemberton overpass is still standing. I built it to last. Even when contractors wanted to cut corners and project managers wanted to move faster than was safe. I said no, every time. I checked every calculation. I did not let anyone rush the inspection. A life's worth of savings is not so different from a bridge. In the end, you build it slowly. You check the load-bearing points. You don't let anyone tell you there's no time to read the documents. And when you're standing over it years later and it's still holding, you know the care was worth it. My wife's anniversary flowers are still in a vase on the kitchen table. White lilies. They're starting to turn, but I haven't taken them down yet. There's something I'm not ready to let go of, and I'm old enough now to know that some things you're allowed to hold on to a little longer than strictly necessary. Raymond is coming for dinner on Friday. I'm going to make the braised short ribs that my wife used to make every January when the weather turned cold. I found the recipe card in her handwriting at the back of the third drawer, right where she always kept things she didn't want to lose. Some things you prepare well in advance, and some things you find exactly when you need them. I've been an engineer long enough to know that both of those are forms of wisdom. I'm 68 years old. I am not done yet.